When no audio was present, did the talk button light up?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
And then ma'am?
I was trying to make sure I wasn't tapping.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and Related Programs will come to order. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being here today to discuss the fiscal year 2024 budget request for the Department of State, and thank you for your service to our country. And in particular, I know that your schedule in these days is rather challenging. So don't think that we don't understand that and that we take it for granted. Before I get to the budget, I want to start by raising some concerns on what I believe have been some really serious blunders that have damaged relationships with our allies and emboldened some of the most dangerous anti-American actors throughout the world. Let me just throw out some examples. The abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan resulted in the creation of 13 new Gold Star families and the horrific abandonment of those who risked their lives to help us. And now women and girls are in Afghanistan are trapped in their homes, they're unable to receive an education, they're raped, they're maimed, they're killed, just if they dare to even attempt to leave their house or to read a book or even walk outside without a male escort. It will take decades at best for Afghanistan to regain the progress that took 20 years of hard work and blood to achieve, and I fear even longer, to really regain our reputation with those who might be inclined to help us in the future. Communist China, well, they continue to steal intellectual property. They have an expansive espionage network in the United States. They threaten its neighbors. They unleashed a pandemic that killed more than 1 million Americans with zero accountability and, frankly, no assistance in finding the origin, and continues funding its military at an alarming rate. And now we see that they are, and very publicly, they're deepening their alliance with Russia. North Korea has again resumed its dangerous and irresponsible missile tests that had been, frankly, slowed rather dramatically in the past years. After failed attempts to yet another deeply flawed Iran deal, the terrorist state of Iran is on the verge of becoming a nuclear power. And we even see that Saudi Arabia and Iran reestablished relations, and that was brokered by communist China. And here in our hemisphere, Colombia and the repressive Maduro dictatorship are deepening their relationship to the detriment of, frankly, not only the Venezuelan and the Colombian people, but also the security of the region. As you know, Mr. Secretary, fentanyl is flowing into our country at unprecedented levels and killing our youth at numbers that, frankly, are beyond alarming. And around the globe, we are giving unilateral concessions to enemies of freedom, such as diplomacy with Maduro and weakened sanctions on the petroleum industry there. Despite historic protests in July of 2021, this administration really did little more than, frankly, lip service to support them and so many others struggling for freedom from tyranny. And meanwhile, frankly, putting really pressure on our allies, whether it's the Dominican Republic or Guatemala, while doing just the opposite to the enemies of freedom. And so some might try to paint a rosy picture of what the situation is right now, but those are the facts as they are. These issues are of such great concern to me because I really believe, Mr. Secretary, and I think you do too, that American leadership remains indispensable, as do our allies and our security partnerships in helping to keep the peace in an increasingly dangerous world. At this time in history, our strategic priorities should be very clear. In Europe, I think we must continue strengthening our alliances, and one way that we strengthen alliances is by ensuring transparency, again, transparency and accountability for every dollar, ensuring the burden of jointly providing Ukraine with the military equipment and other tools that it needs to defeat Russia and to win that war. In the Indo-Pacific, we must strengthen our defense posture and really collective deterrence to advance regional peace and security, including by helping to provide Taiwan with the capabilities it needs to prevent or even defeat an aggression by communist China. And we can't be late to that. In the Middle East, we must continue to support our strongest ally, Israel. We have to continue to degrade, or really start degrading in a much more aggressive way, ISIS, build on the Abraham Accords, and prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, and cease their practice of exporting terrorism, whether it's directly or through proxies like Hezbollah and others. Another priority must be to, again, stand up for freedom, for human freedom, and the democratic principles that we all share. It is essential for the United States to stand with those who courageously struggle for freedom, for individual liberty and democracy in some of the world's most oppressive political environments, and that includes Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua just here in our hemisphere. Mr. Secretary, turning to the budget. We are all aware of the nation's fiscal challenges, and this committee is really uniquely responsible for being good stewards of the people's hard-earned money. The President's fiscal year 2024 budget request for state and USID, I think, unfortunately, really misses the mark. The annual increases requested by this administration have been rejected in Congress, even by the President's own party, year after year. So proposing yet another large increase to a Republican House in such a, frankly, difficult fiscal environment strikes me as willfully unrealistic, but the problem is it also sets unattainable expectations abroad. In the weeks ahead, this subcommittee will scrub every line of the budget proposal to determine what funding is directly tied to U.S. national security. We will write a bill that is focused, strategic, and really aimed to addressing the top foreign policy priorities of our country. Now, respectfully, what we will not fund are controversial woke programs that tarnish the reputation of America abroad. The State Department must end its effort to export a radical political agenda on issues that, even in this country, are divisive. Not only do these programs stir controversy and division in the countries where they take place, they frankly further diminish support for foreign aid here at home. And at a time, Mr. Secretary, when, because of the situation, you're going to need all the help you can get. Mr. Secretary, in closing, I want to, again, and I mean this sincerely, and I think you know this, I want to thank you for being here. In particular, we all know your schedule right now in these days. And for your service to this amazing country of ours. And also want to thank, through you, the men and women of the Department of State for the hard work that they do day in, day out on behalf of all Americans. So thank you again, Mr. Secretary. With that, I want to recognize the distinguished ranking member, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, for her opening statements. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'd like to add my welcome to you, Mr. Secretary, and I want to thank you for your testimony regarding the President's proposed fiscal 2024 budget request for State Department, Foreign Operations, and related programs. Secretary Blinken, first of all, your travel and your energy are truly inspirational. We appreciate the active and robust diplomacy on the part of the United States. And there is no doubt that it is sorely needed with the challenges that we faced on just about every continent. And I, too, want to salute and thank all of the employees of the Department of State. We do have three legs of our national security policy: development, diplomacy, and defense. And certainly the two that you are shepherding has been amazing in the last few years, but also we need to have more resources in development and diplomacy. You're showing how diplomacy works. The work done by this administration, in large part to you, thanks to you and the State Department, has kept a global coalition together in support of Ukraine and the condemnation of Russian aggression. This diplomacy increases the chance of us getting to a lasting and peaceful resolution. The past year, we have seen a truce in Ethiopia hold beyond expectations. U.S.-led efforts with partners around the world to respond to massive natural disasters and food security crises and new global leadership breakthroughs, such as the new malaria vaccine, getting ready to roll out. Great accomplishment. These achievements have not been possible without the active United States and its leadership. But meeting these challenges requires the United States to have the presence, the tools, and resources to show up, engage in dialogue and consensus building, and hold everyone, including ourselves, accountable for hard-fought commitments. It is this primacy of our diplomacy and development work to both the United States' strategic interests as well as global peace and stability that makes me so concerned about the cuts being considered by the new Republican majority for fiscal 2024. The administration's request recognizes the need for the United States to engage in every fora, especially where those that do not share our values are present. A cut in resources will exacerbate vaccines development, stunt efforts to build a skilled and, yes, diverse staff, and this does not mean the definition that's used about woke. We want the staff to reflect the population of the United States. And also, the budget undermines engagement at all levels, putting the United States on a back foot. Reductions would delay both physical and cybersecurity upgrades needed to keep the United States facilities and personnel safe and secure. And cuts would cripple United States efforts to invest in sustainable development goals, the framework agreed by every single country to tackle shared challenges like gender inequality, extreme hunger and poverty, and threats to public health. I hope that you will discuss this administration's ongoing approach to building partnerships in sub-Saharan Africa, where, of course, the last administration called these countries S-hole countries, and the Caribbean, both of which represent untapped potential for U.S. engagement. My colleagues are often quick to focus on the influence of the People's Republic of China. I will point out that China has now more embassies and more diplomats around the world than the United States does. Simply, we are being outmanned and outwomaned since countries recently are clamoring for greater partnerships with the United States. So we've got to figure out a strategy to close this gap. Another area that we can't afford to fall back on is global health. United States leadership and investment has helped millions to survive and thrive, but these gains are fragile. The world is organizing to make sure we are better prepared to detect and respond to the next disease outbreak. Cuts to global health funding will prove short-sighted the next time a pandemic from abroad comes to our shores. The COVID pandemic cost trillions of dollars in global economic output. We cannot afford to put preparedness on the back burner again. And last but not least, we must get on track to deal with the existential challenge of climate change. I joined the most recent Conference of Parties, or COP, in Egypt last October, as you were there also, and many of our colleagues, which is the largest gathering of policymakers, experts, and activists on climate annually. Every person I came across emphasized the need for United States leadership and their frustration that resources and action have not matched our rhetoric. The people suffering from most extreme weather, changing climate patterns, and the loss of biodiversity are those who had the smallest role in causing these changes. Decades of investment in agriculture, health, and infrastructure are being wiped out by these new climate trends. Countries are slowly being swallowed by the sea. My constituents in California certainly understand. And I expect those suffering from hurricanes in Florida, drought in the Southwest, or flooding in the Midwest do also. The United States has a moral responsibility and a self-interest to address the drivers of these changes and the effects of the most vulnerable. We need to do much more on climate change, not less. Mr. Secretary, it's evident the administration has worked very hard over the past 2 years to restore America's global reputation and promote engagement and dialogue with international organizations and partners. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle bring some distinct priorities, but I believe we all end at the same conclusion. Active United States leadership and engagement leads to better outcomes for both our country and, I hope we would agree, the rest of the world. A more stable, peaceful, democratic, and prosperous world depends on an active and engaged United States. A robust and growing international affairs budget is desperately needed to achieve this. And so I want to thank you again for your tireless work on behalf of our country and for being with our subcommittee today, and I look forward to your testimony.
I thank the ranking member. Now I'm honored to yield to the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Granger, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Diaz-Balart, and congratulations on your new role. Welcome, Secretary Blinken. You're here at a time of growing threats to our national security. Our Director of National Intelligence recently said this is a complex and pivotal time for our country. Our military commander in the Indo-Pacific region has also described this era as the most dangerous he had seen in 30 years. As we face growing threats around the globe, I'm concerned your budget proposal is not adequately prioritized to meet these challenges. I'd like to discuss a few areas of concern. First, with Russia continuing to wage war in Ukraine, there are growing questions about how and when this conflict ends. This budget proposal does not explain how the administration plans to assist Ukraine in winning the war. It also doesn't say how much funding you think will be needed this year and beyond. In addition, many administration priorities, such as climate change, would receive huge increases while security assistance is at a lower priority. With China and Russia forming a strong partnership, it's more critical than ever that we assist countries aligned with our values. In the Middle East, our great ally, Israel, continues to face threats from Iran and its expanding nuclear program. We must do all we can to ensure Israel has the resources it needs to protect itself. I'm also concerned about the significant increase proposed for the United Nations. As the largest contributor, we can't afford to write a blank check. We must ensure that the UN is held accountable, including for the unacceptable bias against Israel. Finally, in our own backyard, the number of migrants crossing the border illegally is at an all-time high, with more than 2.7 million last year. Cartels are taking advantage of the administration's open border policies to sneak in deadly weapons and drugs. Your request seeks to address some of these challenges, but it misses the mark on many key priorities. To close, Mr. Secretary, we understand the demands of your job and want to work with you on all of the issues to strike the right balance. We wish you and your department success in keeping our country and allies safe and secure. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I now also have the honor to yield to the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Delauro, for her opening statement. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Diaz-Balart and Ranking Member Lee, for hosting what is a very important hearing. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today and welcome to you. You know, it's over the past 2 years with your visionary leadership, steadfast commitment to the safety and security of our nation and the world, the Biden administration has made great strides toward restoring America's place as leader on a world stage. You are at the forefront of addressing some of the most pressing global challenges. And in partnership with you, this committee has passed bills over the past 2 years that strengthen our alliances, promote democracy, and improve our diplomatic capabilities, support our world's most vulnerable people, bolster global public health infrastructure. You know, like we know, that our nation is safer when alongside defense we provide significant funding for diplomacy, development, and humanitarian assistance. Though I am so proud of the progress we have made, extreme House Republican calls to cut the 2024 spending to the 2022 level, and even more extreme calls by former Republican officials to fully eliminate critical foreign policy agencies and programs threaten global democracy and the health and the safety of our nation and the world. Given the enduring global challenges we are facing, I'm glad to see that the President's budget request seeks to address them. This moment in time requires the United States be present and participating in multilateral forums and with a diplomatic staff that represents the diversity and the richness of our nation. I am glad that the President budget's request invests in our diplomatic corps, increases our contributions to key UN agencies and peacekeeping operations. Having a seat at the table is the only way we can maintain our role as a global leader and to advance our interests. And as natural disasters, the pandemic, rising food and fuel prices, conflicts, the war in Ukraine, show so clearly America's support for vulnerable communities around the globe is critical, which is why I was pleased to see the President's request for increased funding for humanitarian aid, for development assistance, for economic support, democracy programs, because we should be affirming our commitment to those most in need, not eliminating support for global democracy, for refugees, where there are 103 million refugees in this world, and for the programs that improve the lives of women and girls. It is simply the right thing to do, and as the pandemic has made abundantly clear, keeping others safe keeps us safe as well. As the budget request confirms, with new funding for global health, health workers, pandemic preparedness, we must never shortchange these programs. They're critical to ensuring that we do not incur the destructive costs of a new pandemic. Our nation is at an inflection point. Will we ensure we are equipped to handle the crises of the future? Or will we allow ourselves to fall behind in global goals and leave our allies behind with baseless, politically motivated budget cuts? I will fight hard so that we are equipped to work with partners around the world to solve the most pressing challenges of the day. I look forward to hearing from you, Secretary Blinken, on how we continue to do that. And with that, I thank you, Chairman Diaz-Balart and Ranking Member Lee, and I yield back.
Thank you so much. Mr. Secretary, your full written statement will be placed in the record. Obviously, feel free to summarize your testimony. Again, you have the floor. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Chairman Diaz-Balart, Chairman Granger, Ranking Member Lee, Ranking Member Delauro, all the members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity today to speak with you about the FY24 budget for the State Department and USAID, but also thank you day in, day out for the work that we're doing together. This is critical for us. We appreciate deeply the work of this committee, and I really look forward to the year ahead as we work together to try to make sure together that we have the strongest possible tools to advance America's interests around the world. And second, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Lee, thank you for both of you for your strong and positive words about the State Department, the people of the State Department. I couldn't agree with you more. I am so deeply honored for this period of time to be leading them and serving with them. And I deeply appreciate the appreciation you've expressed for the work that they do day in, day out. So thank you for that. And I could not agree more. We are at an inflection point. The post-Cold War era is over, and there is an intense competition underway right now to shape what comes next. The United States has a positive vision for the future, a world that is free, that is secure, that is open, that is prosperous. This budget will help us advance that vision and deliver on issues that matter to the American people by preparing us to take on two major sets of challenges that are distinct but also interconnected and overlapping. The first set is posed by our strategic competitors. The immediate acute threat posed by Russia's autocracy and aggression, most destructively through its brutal aggression against Ukraine, and of course, the long-term challenge that is posed by the People's Republic of China. The second set of challenges is posed by shared global tests that we have to meet, including the climate crisis, migration, food and energy insecurity, pandemics, all of which directly affect the lives of our fellow citizens as well as their livelihoods and people around the world. With this committee's leadership and support, including through the FY23 Omnibus, the United States is in a stronger geopolitical position than we were a few years ago to take on these challenges. We have drawn enormous power from investments that we've made here at home in our economic strength and technological edge, including through the Infrastructure Investment Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. The unmatched network of alliances and partnerships has never been stronger, and I think that's in part because we have reinvested in them, working to re-engage them, rejuvenate them, re-energize them. We're expanding our presence in critical regions like the Indo-Pacific, and we're leading unprecedented coalitions to confront aggression and address humanitarian crises around the world. The FY24 budget request for the State Department and USAID meets this moment. The budget will sustain our security, our economic and energy and humanitarian support for Ukraine so that we ensure that President Putin's war remains a strategic failure. The budget will also strengthen our efforts to outcompete the PRC. President Biden is firmly committed to advancing a free and open Indo-Pacific. That's why this proposal asks for an 18% increase in our budget for that region for over FY23. The budget contains both discretionary and mandatory proposals, I suspect we'll come back to those, for new innovative investments to outcompete China, including by enhancing our presence in the region, ensuring that what we and our fellow democracies have to offer, including things like maritime security, disease surveillance, energy infrastructure, digital technology is more attractive than the alternative being proposed. The budget will help us push back on advancing authoritarianism and democratic backsliding by strengthening democracies around the world, including through supporting independent media, countering corruption, defending free and fair elections. And it will allow us to pay our contributions to international organizations because we do need to be at the table wherever and whenever new international rules, standards, norms are being decided that affect the livelihoods of our people. Wherever they're being debated and decided, we need to be there. The budget will also allow us to continue leading the world in addressing these global challenges, from food and energy insecurity to climate and health crises. Just on that last point, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of Pepfar, which I believe is one of the greatest achievements in our foreign policy over the last couple of decades. And to Ranking Member Lee, to you and others for your strong support and leadership on this. I think it's been a great tribute and credit to our country. It's something I hear as I travel, for example, throughout Africa. It's saved 25 million lives. This budget will help us continue the fight against HIV/AIDS while advancing health security more broadly through a new Bureau of Global Health Security and Diplomacy, which I look forward to working with Congress to establish this year. The budget will advance our efforts to modernize our department, including by expanding our training float, updating our technology, carrying out diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility initiatives, including to make our overseas missions more accessible. I'm grateful for the progress that we've already made together, including Congress's support in updating the Secure Embassy Construction and Counterterrorism Act and the Accountability Review Board to give us the flexibility to open new missions and to better manage the risks that our people face around the world. We know there's more to do, and we're looking forward to working with Congress, working with this committee to accelerate modernization efforts so that the department can better attract, retain, and support our first-rate workforce that you referred to. We're in a competition there, too, for talent, and I want to make sure we have a department that attracts that workforce and keeps them. Finally, the budget will further what is a personal priority for me that's been referenced today already, and I know for many of you, and that is supporting enduring welcome, our whole-of-government effort to resettle our Afghan allies. Keeping our promises to those who stood by us and served with us remains an unwavering priority for me. The budget will help us continue to make good on that commitment. When I took on this role, one of the things that I was dead serious about was working to restore Congress's place as an equal partner in our foreign policy making. I really am serious and committed to that. I, Mr. Chairman, deeply appreciate the conversations we've had and the work that I hope we can do together. So with that, I welcome questions, comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So the ranking member and I were kind of behind the scenes you were talking about. We're going to need a little bit, bear with us, we're going to need a little bit of flexibility as to who we recognize first.
Please.
Because folks do have to go. And so I will start with the chair of the full committee. Again, Chairwoman Granger, thank you for being here, and you are recognized.
Thank you very much. I have just two questions. One, is Iran continuing their weapons buildup and construction of underground facilities? And what more can be done to stop Iran's support of terrorist organizations?
Chair, two things. Yes, they are continuing, just to be as clear and specific as I can be, not their weapons program per se, which we believe continues to be halted, but the production of the capacity to produce fissile material for a weapon on very short notice. And yes, what we have seen over the last few years is a reacceleration of that program to have enough fissile material on hand to produce very quickly, should they develop a weapon, the means to have an explosive nuclear device. Second, we are in place after place and with partner after partner confronting the egregious behavior exhibited by Iran, including going after with sanctions and other measures, many of the actions they're taking, the UAV network, for example, that is supporting Russia in its aggression against Ukraine, working to counter the activities that they're engaged in throughout the region, including in Syria and Iraq, working, of course, to end the war in Yemen, where they are supplying the Houthis that are firing rockets and projectiles at Saudi Arabia, as well as in Yemen itself, and building stronger partnerships to deal with Iranian misbehavior.
Thank you very much.
And Member Delauro.
Fine, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, Mr. Secretary, I'm pleased that the department budget prioritizes multilateral contributions, $41.3 billion to the UN, other international organizations. Funding, I believe, is critical to supporting global peace, to support our allies across the world. Organizations like UNICEF, UN Development Program, International Civil Aviation Organization, close partners of the U.S. in some of the toughest areas of the world. However, I will add that some of my Republican colleagues and some extreme Republican officials, former extreme Republican officials, have called for the eliminating funding for the UN. Just, can you speak to the catastrophic effects this would have on global democracy if such cuts were made? And there are those who claim that they want to be tough on China, are among the same who are calling for spending cuts in this area. How would multilateral cuts further enable and advance the interests of our adversaries like China and Russia?
Yeah, thank you very much for raising that. And look, we all know that the United Nations as an institution, various programs need reform, need to be strengthened, need to be challenged where they're not producing results. Having said that, I think, you know, if you think about It's a Wonderful Life, and, you know, you took George Bailey out of the picture and you saw what happened in Bedford Falls, for all of its deficiencies, you take the UN out of the picture, and we're going to be faced with a really hard choice. Either ourselves doing the work that the UN is doing around the world, or it not getting done. If you're looking at public health, if you're looking at vaccination campaigns that the UN is engaged in, of course we had COVID, where it played a critical role, but we have UNICEF that is reaching almost half of the world's children with life-saving vaccines. We have the work that it's doing to ensure that infant and maternal mortality rates have gone down dramatically in the world as a result of its work. We see it in education, where an organization that's part of the UN, like UNICEF, is providing education to hundreds of millions of out-of-school children who are out of school for one reason or another, typically conflict, displacement, and doing it in a way that hopefully means we don't have lost generations. If you look at global food security, the work of the World Food Program, the Food and Agriculture Organization, et cetera, WFP last year, with David Beasley's tremendous leadership, fed 140 million people around the world, dealing with humanitarian emergencies, peace and security challenges, peacekeeping, very challenged. And there are, you know, issues with that need to be resolved. On the other hand, if you have roughly 100,000 UN peacekeepers, a handful of whom are American, and they are taking on missions in places that are important, and if they weren't doing it, someone else would, or no one would do it, that's important too. And I could go on, but the bottom line is this, that it's engaged in critically important work that advances our own interests, and so we need to sustain it. When it comes to the budget, look, we're kind of contorted right now, because yes, we are the leading contributor to the United Nations and to most of its programs, but because we don't pay on time, because we're often in arrears in certain programs, some of our competitors, starting with China, point to that and say, look, the United States isn't serious about this, and it undermines the credit we should be getting for being the leading contributor. Finally, what we've seen over the last few years is a very serious competition coming principally from China, as well as some other countries, to try to dominate the international organizations, taking on the open positions, making sure that they're the ones who have their seats at the table. We have pushed back the last couple of years relentlessly on that, organizing campaigns to make sure that Americans or people from like-minded countries are competing and winning these jobs. We just ran a very successful campaign for the International Telecommunications Union, something that probably a handful of Americans have heard of, but that's critical for setting standards and norms in telecommunications, which is a security issue for us as well as an economic issue. So, you know, it's the old adage, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. We want to be at the table.
Thank you. If I can, just a couple of quick questions with regard to Ukraine. There are some members who have suggested that it's time to end sending U.S. aid to Ukraine. Just talk about that for a minute. If we cut off aid, what would be the impact on Ukrainian people, their will to continue to fight against Russian aggression? Do you expect the need for another Ukraine supplemental. And I noticed the amount of humanitarian resources provided in 22 and 23 through emergency supplementals. The 24 budget requests only a modest increase to ensure these programs are providing services for the most vulnerable. If humanitarian counts are not increased, given the huge need in the world, what will the impact be on the most vulnerable?
Simply put, the assistance that we provided through the generosity of American taxpayers to Ukraine has literally been the difference between life and death for individuals, life and death for the country itself. But the fact is as well, we have rallied, as a couple of you pointed out, more than 50 other countries around the world, well beyond Europe, to engage in that support with us. And I think it is very important to focus on the fact that we do have real burden sharing when it comes to Ukraine, because I think the American people deserve to know that they are not in this, we are not in this alone. If you look at the money that's already been expended, not the money that remains to be expended, but the money that's already been expended, security assistance to Ukraine, we provided about $32 billion thus far of actually expended money. Non-U.S. money in that has been about $22 billion. When it comes to budget support, economic support, we have provided about $15.5 billion. Other countries, $24 billion. When it comes to humanitarian assistance, we provided about $2 billion. It's been vital. But other countries altogether, about $3.5 billion. And of course, our European friends have taken in about 8 million Ukrainian refugees and supported them with social services, ability to work, go to school. So I think if we pulled the plug on that, either ourselves or allies and partners, it would have disastrous consequences for Ukraine. And let me just emphasize one last thing, if I can. First, I take very seriously, deadly serious, our responsibility, Congress's responsibility, to make sure that the money that our taxpayers are generously providing to Ukraine is being well and appropriately spent. And I appreciate the chair's focus on this as well. So we have in place a very strong system to make sure that the money is being appropriately spent. I have 45 people in our embassy in Ukraine whose job it is to oversee the expenditure of these monies. The Pentagon has its own team making sure that the weapons that are being provided are not diverted, not misused. We just had our first report by the Office of the Inspector General on the oversight of the monies being expended in Ukraine, and I know that report's been shared. I'm happy to say we got very good grades on what we're doing, how it's being done, the process. Finally, it's worth noting that the way most of these funds are expended typically is through a World Bank program that only pays the money upon a receipt for an authorized expenditure. And so that system itself is very important. And of course, we have third-party validators involved, including, for example, the Deloitte accounting firm, which is working in the Ministry of Finance and working to make sure. I'd note finally that it's my belief that President Zelensky is dead serious about the importance of our money, everyone else's money being well spent. You've seen that in recent weeks, he has fired a bunch of senior officials across various ministries because he was concerned either about corruption or simply inadequate management. That, to me, is proof that he is not only paying lip service to, but is taking action to make sure that our money is being well spent.
Whether we expect another supplemental?
I can't honestly speak to that right now because, again, of the generosity of Congress at the end of last year. The last supplemental carries us through much of this year. And so much is going to depend on what happens on the ground. I will say this. I think we also have to work to get to a sustainable place in terms of our support for Ukraine for the mid to long term, which is to say, what are the right kinds of programs, not just us, the international financial institutions in particular, other countries, so that their economy can be on sound footing, their deterrent and defense posture is adequate to prevent another Russian aggression, et cetera. We're going to have to focus on making that kind of transition at the right moment.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
No, thank you, and let me also thank the Ranking Member Lee for allowing some flexibility because of people's schedules. Just spent some time talking about the Ukraine.
Yep.
And I will tell you, I'm glad what you just focused on, which is accountability. And I will tell you that I think it's important that, I think that the concept that Putin can win and get away with this would be a very dangerous sign, particularly not only for what Russia might do in the future in Europe, but also what China would potentially see as a green light, right? So I think it's important that Putin be defeated, but it is crucial that every dollar that is coming from the United States is accounted for. Every penny is accounted for. And it is crucial to make sure that the Europeans are stepping up. And so I like what you've just said, but Mr. Secretary, just know that we're going to continue to push and press on that. I know also that Chairman McCall has, I think, a hearing precisely on this kind of thing, which is important. So I look forward to working with you, and I know you will not be surprised if we are exceedingly aggressive to make sure that every cent is accounted for and every piece of equipment is accounted for. And so I look forward to working with you on that front. I thought that now it's totally switching to a different part of the world. The establishment of the Abraham Accords by the previous administration I thought was really important. And I support your efforts, by the way, to further expand these agreements, to deepen economic and diplomatic and security relationships, frankly, between our strongest democratic ally, Israel, and other partners in the region. What can you tell us about the administration, your efforts to expand the Abraham Accord, and also can you kind of tell us? I mentioned at the beginning of my statement about this now not an alliance, but the renewal of relationships, right? Formal relationships between Saudi Arabia and Iran and the Chinese involvement there. What can you tell us about where we are there, and give me your point of view and what you see coming forward in the next few months?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just very quickly, I really appreciate the focus that you're bringing to the expenditure of our resources in Ukraine. I couldn't agree with you more. And by the way, I think it's very important that Congress play that leading role. It actually helps helps us, for example, in going to our Ukrainian partners and saying, the folks who are actually providing the money that you need are very focused on this, and you need to remain focused on it too. So thank you for that. Second, on the Abraham Accords in the Middle East, let me just say two things. First, Abraham Accords, I could not agree with you more. We, from day one, have strongly supported them, and we are looking to do two things. We're looking to deepen them, that is to deepen the partnerships with the existing participants, and to expand, to bring in new countries. Of course, I think it's no secret that we, Israel, would hope ultimately that Saudi Arabia might be brought in to the Abraham Accords, but there are a number of other countries that we're looking at. Second, in terms of actually advancing things, one of the things we did last year was to stand up something related to it and supportive of it called the Negev Forum, where we took Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Bahrain, Egypt, to work together to establish working groups in 6 different areas that can actually produce concrete results, concrete projects that will benefit people in all those countries. Because what's so important about this, we need to demonstrate through these accords that it's actually bringing real benefits to people. That will grow the support for them. It'll deepen it in countries, and we're already seeing it manifest itself. On the Saudi-Iran agreement, this has been something that's been in the works for several years, not just several weeks or several months. The Saudis, the Iranians have had meetings in Oman, in Iraq, going back some time. And this all goes back to, I guess, 2016, when the Saudis put to death a very prominent Shia cleric. There was an attack on the Saudi embassy in Iran. They broke off relations. So the last couple of years, they've been trying to get them back. I think what it's easiest to say, most accurate to say about China's role is not so much a facilitator, but simply a host of the final act in this. Smart diplomacy, but this was really the product of work between the two countries. Mr. Chairman, I think that first, we have to be appropriately skeptical about whether this will actually be implemented. We'll see. Iran has made agreements before that, of course, it hasn't kept. But if it is, I actually see this as a net positive, because if the result is to decrease tensions in at least part of the region, but specifically to curb Iranian behavior that we object to, for example, helping the Houthis attack Saudi Arabia with the provision of missiles, where, by the way, we have 80,000 Americans that's actually a good thing. So we'll track this closely. We'll see if it actually gets implemented. And by the way, I don't think it undermines, for example, the interest and prospects for having, at some point, Saudi Arabia be part of the Abraham process.
And we'll continue that conversation another time, because to me, that is very concerning. The fact that, we've seen an emergence of China in a way that we hadn't seen it, frankly, ever. To the ranking member, thank you again for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just make a comment with regard to taxpayer dollars and accountability. Just for the record, I want to remind you that the Pentagon has failed 5 audits, and the waste, fraud, and abuse in the defense budget is rampant. And at some point, we've got to get that under control. And taxpayers need to know that is the only agency, the Pentagon, the Defense Department, in history that has failed 5 audits and that has never passed an audit. That's as FYI for the record. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned Pepfar. It's been really a bright spot of bipartisan support. However, probably 20 to 25% of the members serving today were serving in the early 2000s when we worked together to authorize Pepfar, which has saved at least 20 million lives. And this is something every member of Congress and every American should know and be proud of. So from the State Department's perspective, why is reauthorization of this flagship program should continue, and why do we need to continue it with bipartisan support? And secondly, many PEPFAR-focused countries, well, several, have reached epidemic levels. What would a reduction of resources for the program mean this close to the 2030 goal of global epidemic control? Because we still are on track to end the AIDS pandemic by 2030.
And I think you put your finger on it. The simple truth is that for the extraordinary number of lives saved and changed, the job is not yet done. And we have the very real possibility of eradicating this epidemic by 2030, but that requires continuing the program. And we've seen in some places some of the dramatic progress actually slow, if not halt. So if we take our foot off the accelerator over the next 7 or so years, I think there's a real danger that we risk losing some of the gains that we've made. So we have to see this through. I just took part in by video in an event that former President Bush had to celebrate the 25 years. I think that's hugely important because it does remind people, or actually informs people, to your point, of what an achievement this has been on a strong bipartisan basis. And it's a huge credit. One other element. You know this better than I do. Wherever I travel, in Africa in particular, the thanks, appreciation, gratitude that we get for the PEPFAR program is extraordinary. And that, frankly, helps our diplomacy. It strengthens our standing in country after country. On a human level, when I get to hear from people who have benefited from the program, it touches me deeply. But geopolitically, this is at a time when, again, we're in competition with China and others for influence. This is one of the programs that has made a huge difference. Were we to undercut it or underfund it, I think that would actually have geopolitical consequences, not just global health consequences.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Do I have another minute, or how are we doing this?
I'm not going to tell you no. But
Well, this will be brief. Very brief. With regard to, I already made my statement about the misuse of taxpayer dollars. So this next question has to do with Haiti, your assessment of the situation in Haiti, and how can the United States best assist the people of Haiti in forging a process to establish a new government that's broadly representative of Haitian society, and how are we dealing with the gang issues in Haiti? I'm glad to see the president meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau.
I don't want to sugarcoat this, and Chairman and I have actually discussed this as well. This is a daunting challenge, and we have interconnected problems, many of which, of course, have built up over the years and over the decades. that we have to grapple with. We need a political way forward that actually gets Haiti to elections so that there can be a clearly legitimate government. Our diplomats are working day in, day out to try to bring the different stakeholders together, to include the government, the Montana Group, and others, to see if they agree. But I have to tell you, and again, you know this so well, given the profound insecurity, that's the single biggest challenge we face right now is insecurity. And we have a country that in critical places is simply dominated by gangs. The state does not have control over security. And there's a nexus between gangs and various elites, political elites, economic elites, that we've been trying to break, because many of these gangs are funded and directed by individuals for whom it's in their interest to have gangs doing their bidding. So we have directly targeted a number of those individuals, including many who enjoy coming to the United States, to make it clear that if they continue to support gangs, that's not going to happen. So we need to break that. And then we need to, as we've been doing, support the Haitian National Police in trying to build up their capacity, not just equipment, training, et cetera. There is, as you know, a very active discussion going on at the United Nations and beyond about whether there needs to be some kind of international force to bolster, probably a police-based force, to bolster the Haitian National Police and to provide greater security. It's a very active discussion. We're heading, in a few hours, heading to Canada with President Biden, and Canada's been one of the countries that's been in the lead of these discussions. We'll see where we get. But I also think that we all need to be thinking hard together about what is it we can do to be sustainably effective. We've been at this for years, for decades, and in so many ways, the Haitian people have been afflicted with so much that's beyond anyone's comprehension. But we have to, I think, come together to find ways to be confident that what we're pursuing can actually be effective in a sustainable way. And again, this is not easy given the long history and the challenges, but those are our areas of immediate focus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know you're interested in Haiti.
Yeah,
Also.
this is a conversation that we're going to have to continue long and hard.
Thank you very
long and hard. No, thank the ranking member, and thank the members for your patience. Mr. Stewart, again, thank you for your patience, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Secretary, thanks for being here. I want you to know that representing the other side of the aisle, that many of us have respect, and we appreciate your service.
Thank you.
And a job you're doing at a very difficult time, honestly, in both domestic and foreign policy. I want to do two housekeeping items, if I could. I'm going to try and do it in 30 seconds and get to what I think are important questions. One, my colleague and friend, Mr. Rushenthaler, you and he discussed something very important to him as well as to I and other members of Congress, and that's Mark Fogel.
Yeah.
Who's being what we think is unlawfully detained or at least wrongfully detained. There's an obvious discrepancy, and I know you've heard this, between his treatment and the treatment of others, say Brittany Griner. And just want you to know that we're going to follow up on that. We won't ask you to comment, but we will follow up on that.
Welcome working with you on that.
Thank you. The second housekeeping item is I agree with the chairman here as well as others as far as oversight of expenditures. Easier to manage oversight of weapons, very, very difficult to do oversight of actual cash payments. I got to tell you, I'm not optimistic that we're going to have a real great outcome on that, just because it's an enormous shift in culture in Ukraine if we do find out there wasn't corruption and waste, because the government just isn't and hasn't been manned by much of Mother Teresa's. We know that it's been considered one of the most corrupt governments, in the region and probably the world. We hope that we can provide oversight, and we need to hold them accountable. But again, I wish I could be more optimistic. But that's, again, just a comment, sharing a concern. If I could now to my questions. I want you to know that I've supported Ukraine, and there's a previous question about some people did not want to support them at all. I got to tell you, I don't know anyone who feels that way. But there's a growing number of us who want to continue to support them, but we also want to understand what it is we're trying to achieve there. And I think we have to adjust our goals and our policies as things develop, and probably ask ourselves for the last 20 years, have we learned lessons in Iraq and Afghanistan that we probably should apply here? The president has said we're going to be here as long as it takes, and I've said this before, as long as it takes to do what? And I asked this question of General Milley earlier today, and I want to paraphrase his answer, but you'll recognize it because it's the president's words. Basically, it's this: to ensure that the international rule of law is upheld, that Ukraine continues as a free and sovereign nation, and that its territory is intact. And that's where I want to concentrate. Its territory is intact. Because my great fear is not a recognition that Crimea is different than the Eastern Donetsk region. And if our commitment and our agreement with Mr. Zelensky is we will support you for whatever you want to achieve, including the free, and no Russian presence at all in Crimea, then we're asking for a world of hurt. I want to know if you agree with that, briefly if you could, or do you think I'm overreacting? Because I don't know that you could convince me that I wouldn't. I'm dramatically concerned about whether our goals are aligned with Mr. Zelensky's when it comes to Crimea.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. It's an important one, and I'll, just to try to be brief. Look, fundamentally, in the first instance, these have to be Ukrainian decisions about what they want their future to be and how that lands, and how that lands in terms of the sovereignty, the territorial integrity, the independence of the country, and exactly how that is defined. So, as we're speaking, the Ukrainians are working to take back as much of the territory. Well, now they're defending against a Russian offensive, but they're also looking at continuing to try to take back as much of the territory as they can that was seized by Russia since February of last year. From our perspective, we think that there's a profound principle at stake, which is that we want peace, we want to see this settle, but we think it does need, in our own interest, to be just and durable. And what do I mean by that? Just in that it upholds the basic principles that are in the UN Charter and that have been the basis for peace and security since after 2 world wars. And that is upholding territorial integrity, upholding independence, upholding sovereignty. How exactly that's defined on the ground, we look to the Ukrainians to tell us. And then durable, because what we don't want, for everyone's interests, is to have this settle in a place and in a way that simply invites the Russians to rest, rearm, and then reattack. I think, though, again, to get to your question, I think there's going to be territory in Ukraine that the Ukrainians are determined to fight for on the ground. There may be territory that they decide that they'll have to try to get back in other ways. Yeah. But we'll look to them to...
Well, and I appreciate that. And once again, you say it's up to Ukraine to make that decision, but it's up to us to decide how far we will go with them down that road as well. And my time is up, so let me just make this comment, if I could, very quickly. And when it comes to burden sharing, and you said it's 32 billion to 22 billion, I wish those numbers were reversed, and I think they should be reversed. This is Europe's backyard. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have growing demands in Congress, just so you can share this with our partners, for more of a one-to-one burden sharing than we've seen in the past. Mm-hmm. And again, if you would convey to our partners that Congress is going to be leaning much more towards that.
And it's actually helpful.
Yeah, exactly. For you to know that, yes, this you can blame us if you want. We're the bad guys.
That's what I do.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart, for bringing up really, really important issues. Ms. Meng, what a pleasure to recognize you now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Lee. Thank you, Secretary Blinken, for your service and for being here today. I actually wanted to ask about a more domestic issue. I've been really alarmed by the extended wait times for U.S. passport renewals and visa applications. Every single day in my office, and I'm sure the offices of many of our constituents, we are receiving frantic calls and outreach from a lot of our constituents. These extended wait times have placed such a burden on our constituents looking to travel to see family and friends or to conduct business abroad. I had secured language in the fiscal year 23 SFOPS report directing the department to dedicate the necessary resources to ensure passport and visa applications are processed in a timely and efficient manner, and to proactively seek technological and procedural alternatives to streamline consular services where possible. How does the administration's fiscal year 24 budget support the department's effort to return to visa processing at full capacity at all embassies and consulates and to cut down on passport processing wait times?
Yeah, thank you very much. Look, I very much appreciate that. Maybe more than any other issue, we, but especially you, hear this from constituents on both sides, passport and visas. And as you all know, with COVID, the bottom basically dropped out on the system. We had the demand went way down. And this is the thing that actually pays for itself in the department, one of the few things, and even adds a little to our budget. That all went down. The floor dropped out. We had to let go or rededicate personnel to do other things. The contractors that we had working on this let go, not continued. So with the emerging from COVID, we've had to build back, and we have been in an intense effort to do that. Let me just quickly say, and we'll share more detailed information on the passport side. So we've had an unprecedented demand for renewed travel, which is a good thing. Historically, the demand's been cyclical. The busy season's kind of March to late summer. Basically, it's full-time now. We're getting 500,000 applications a week for a passport. That's 30 to 40% above last year. So it's dramatic. Now, in FY22, we issued a record number of passport books, 22 million. We're on track to break that in FY23. We've hired staff to increase the adjudicative capacity, to make sure that we've got the customer service phone lines. Man, we have more people in the pipeline, and that's also reflected in the budget. It's hugely important. I have a task force established at headquarters to marshal all of these efforts so that we're really digging in on this. We were authorizing overtime. We've opened satellite offices. We're organizing cores at the headquarters to assist in processing. Processing times. I would just say, and we'll get you, if it hasn't already happened, this information. I think it's really important that we be as clear and transparent as possible with people who are looking for passports to know what they can expect. So right now, given the unprecedented demand, we're looking for a regular passport about 10 to 13 weeks, and for an expedited passport, about 7 to 9 weeks. We've launched an online renewal pilot. This is something I have great hope for. We did this in 2022 because there's no reason, frankly, that someone who already has a passport and just needs to renew it shouldn't be able to do that online, not have to come in to a passport center with all the resources that requires. We had 500,000 renewal requests submitted through this pilot project. We've now halted it to make sure that we can fine-tune it and improve it before we roll it out in a bigger way. But here's the bottom line. We expect that 65% of renewal customers for passports will be able to do so online once this program is fully up and running. On the visa side, this has been a major effort for us, and I think we're starting to see results. First, I just want to assure you, when it comes to the categories of visas that have the most impact on our economy, particularly for students, for temporary workers, for business travelers, maritime crews, they've been the priority. And so we've tried to make sure that they are served, and we are at pre-pandemic levels or better in those categories. For visitor visas, the median global interview appointment wait time is 2 months, half of what it was a year ago. In most places, the wait times are much lower. By the way, we have about 58 million foreign nationals who actually hold valid visas, either because they're Canadian or because they're part of the visa waiver, their countries are part of the visa waiver program, so they don't have to worry about this. But for those who do, we are surging our resources into that. We have very high productivity that we're finally getting. First 5 months of FY23, 18% more non-immigrant visas were issued than in the same period in FY19, before the pandemic. In category after category, we're actually getting back to and even bettering pre-pandemic levels. The immigrant visas are a whole other issue. We're doing a lot of work on that. I know I'm going on, but what I'd love to do, Mr. Chairman, is to make sure that we're sharing with you detailed information about the work we've done and the work that's left to do, both on passports and on visas.
Thank you. Important questions, and we look forward to continuing working with that. Mr. Fleischman, you have the floor, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for appearing before us today. Thank you for your service to our nation. As you may know, I'm the chair of the Energy and Water Subcommittee of Appropriation, and I have a rather unique constituency in the great city of Oak Ridge, around there. Earlier today, we had Secretary Granholm before us. So my questions are going to be centered around that. The first question is going to involve strategic and nuclear stability, sir. As we know, Russia has unfortunately suspended its participation in the New START Treaty, a move that greatly saddens and concerns me. I grew up in an era of mutually assured destruction and the like. I'm 60 years old, so I don't want to see another arms race. But we've seen China at the same time make it clear that they have no interest in discussing arms control. So my question for you, Mr. Secretary, is do you anticipate the global strategic stability will continue to deteriorate through the rest of the decade in light of what Russia and China is doing? And what measures can we take as a nation? And I'll be specific, perhaps something along the lines of regaining our ability to domestically enrich uranium as one matter. But I want your thoughts on that, specifically regarding our own nuclear arsenal to strengthen us as a nation. What are your thoughts, sir?
Thank you. Look, I share this concern, and I think Russia's decision to pull out of New START was both deeply regrettable and deeply irresponsible. The limitations of START, which it says it's going to continue to comply with, but also the verification procedures, the inspections, the notifications, all good for us, also, frankly, good for them. I think they made a big mistake. To your point about China, this is a real concern as they build up their arsenal in a very opaque way. And we've engaged them on, at the very least, working on risk reduction with us if they're not willing to engage in arms control. Thus far, that's not something they've been willing to do. So I think this poses a growing problem. We are determined, and we will make sure that our own nuclear stockpile, and for however long nuclear weapons are needed, is safe, secure, effective, and we're determined to do that. When it comes to making sure that we have appropriate supplies and we don't have dependencies on other countries, that's something we're also looking very hard at as well, and I appreciate your focus on it.
Yes, sir. The second issue deals with global energy geopolitics. Our adversaries, and I'll be specific, the Russians and the Chinese, go into countries with a very, I'll say, very attractive and lucrative package for civil nuclear energy. They'll agree to build, they'll agree to finance, they'll agree to run a nuclear power plant. I've spoken with leaders in Poland, I've spoken with leaders in the Czech Republic, being specific, Romania. They come to me and they say, we do not want to do business with these other countries. We want to do business with the United States. The problem that we're seeing, and I've spoken with members of both administrations, spoke with someone from the Biden administration last night about that, very knowledgeable gentleman, talking about the fact that we do not have a funding mechanism to allow us as a nation to compete. We've got some of the best nuclear designs in this country. As a matter of fact, today I was with TVA and Hitachi. They're looking at a model, but there's several small modular nuclear reactors out there that could allow the United States to go in and not only compete and win in the global markets economically, American jobs and the like, but also to thwart that geopolitical advantage that our adversaries have. So my question is, what do you see as a financing mechanism? Could it be the EM Bank? What are your thoughts about that? I've spoken with the folks at the World Bank. They say no. Where are you on this?
Yeah, again, very much agree with you on this. We have, I think, a huge opportunity with the small modular reactors. The technology is extremely attractive. We have, as you know, an agreement with Romania to proceed with that. We're working on a number of others. But to your point, in the absence of adequate financing, especially for countries that are challenged, it makes it a lot harder. So one of the mechanisms that I've tried to turn on and direct at projects like this, which it wasn't doing in the past, is DFC, Development Finance Corporation. And I think we're seeing some success there. We have to find ways to get some, in some cases, some equity in the game, or at least to help finance part of it. At the end of the day, as we all know, our comparative advantage is being a catalyst for the private sector. We're not going to match some of the a country like China, for example, dollar to dollar with taxpayer resources. But if we're using the tools that we have in government effectively, like DFC, like XIM, et cetera, then we can catalyze the private sector. But they need to have some sense of security that at least the beginnings of the foundation of financing is there. And again, I think the DFC is one of the tools that we're now trying to use in that area too.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for your answers to my questions, and I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The member from Florida, Ms. Frankel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for your service. Let me start quickly with something which I think we have very good bipartisan support, and then I'll move to something where might be a little anxiety in the room. First on Israel, thank you. I can tell you I fully support your budget for U.S. assistance to Israel, which includes the $3.3 billion in security assistance, which is part of the memorandum of understanding followed by both Obama, Trump, Biden administration. And I just want to say for the record that I would expect and hope that, I know there is some political conflict internally in Israel, but that should not affect our full support in terms of Israel's security. And then on the next subject, my, I know we're going to go again on this, which has to do with women and making sure, in my opinion, that women are in control of their own personal decision, whether or not to, how and when to bring in a child and so forth. So I want to ask you a couple things about the budget. First, and I think this also ties in with the fact that rape and sexual abuse has been being used as a weapon of war, especially we know in Ukraine. Yesterday, we met with women from Afghanistan, and they also complained in that regard. So first, I do think there's going to be, or may be an issue in terms of cuts to family planning and to UNFPA. I'd like to get your opinion on what that would mean in terms of security and in terms of women.
To us, these programs and our ability to fund them is critical. It's not only critical to making sure that women and girls have the protections that they need and deserve. It is also, I think, important to larger questions of security and stability in a number of these countries. We follow the law, and we will always follow the law, but we also believe we need to continue to lead in global health, in advancing gender equality, in women and girls empowerment, and evidence-based policies to advance public health. And we're determined to do that. The budget reflects that. That includes support for sexual reproductive health and the associated rights, which is key to the well-being and the health of women. One thing I'd point out, this goes more broadly to the gender gap that we see around the world. If we were able, just in terms of compensation and employment, to eliminate the gap that exists in the world on a gender basis, and women were able both to earn and to be employed to the same extent as men, there's a very compelling study that shows it would add about $28 trillion to the global economy. That's very powerful. So we, specifically when it comes to health, our budget reflects this. We will strongly consider to continue to support. And more broadly, we have an effort underway to advance greater gender equity and equality and the empowerment of women around the world.
Thank you. And we just had a bipartisan meeting, Women, Peace and Security Caucus meeting with women from Ukraine who were explaining to us that, I mean, not only have, of course, many of them have had to flee the country, but now many women are actually in charge of so many things, making sure things happen in the country because the men, so many men are fighting. So obviously getting them the health care that they need. And I'm seeing I'm running out of time, but I want to say the same thing about education. There are so many girls out of school in the world, especially because of what happened with COVID. I'd like you to comment about that.
We have, one of the risks, and of course we face this at home in different ways, is exactly that. The last thing that we want, obviously for ourselves, but also for people around the world, is any kind of lost generation because of being out of school. Around the world, of course, it's not just COVID, it's the fact that you have in so many places conflict, population displacement, where it's been vital to make sure that we provide and others provide the resources necessary to provide for kids' education. I mentioned earlier the vital role that an organization like UNICEF plays in making sure that those who don't have access to normal education actually get it. So the request we have in our own budget is about $650 million for basic education and about $230 million or so for higher education. I think the landscape has been somewhat transformed by COVID-19. There are changes to education programming, kids returning to schools. We have some money that remains in the pipeline. And I have to tell you as well, we have a bit of a challenge because in places where we have sought to spend money on education, we've in some cases been blocked by governments that don't necessarily like that. So my belief is that with the money requested, as well as with some existing money that we haven't been able to spend in the way we wanted, we have the appropriate resources for this coming year. But we very much want to work with you on this. We need to get this one right, and it's something that I've got an intense focus on.
Thank you very much. Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, you're going to now be able to speak to, we have 2 new members of this committee, and they have been, frankly, they've made a dramatic impact already. And so the first one will be Mr. Carl, and it's a privilege to have you on the committee, sir. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us today, and I've really enjoyed hearing all these different topics and conversations, but I'd like to talk to you about one that's close to home for me, and I'll start with that. In the news lately, the direct impact in the state of Alabama. Last Tuesday, the Mexican government began seizing the assets of Vulcan Material Marine Terminal facility there in Mexico. Mm-hmm. I read your statement of the department claiming that, in a quote, you're concerned about the fair treatment of our companies in Mexico. Mm-hmm. Frankly, Mr. Secretary, I find that to be pretty weak, considering you just had an American company's assets seized. I really am very concerned about other American companies that are there that they will seize. So I think you need to put a little stronger statement together. Tell me, please explain to me or elaborate on how the State Department actually plans to ensure that security is fair and for these companies, fair treatment of our companies abroad.
No, I appreciate you raising that, and I think you're right. I have to tell you, I am very concerned about the fair treatment of our companies in Mexico, both just in terms of the larger environment in which they're operating, something that we've engaged President Lopez Obrador repeatedly, but I'm also very concerned about the situation. I think you're referring to Vulcan Materials.
Yes.
In this case. Very concerned about that situation. We've had our team on the ground, as well as from back here in D.C., very actively engaged on this. We've been requesting information from local authorities, as well as from the federal government about the military and police presence in.
If I can interrupt you there, I was in Mexico City. I was in Mexico City 3 weeks ago. I met with the president for 3 hours. I met with their Interior Department for 2 hours. I was assured that it was about to be worked out, and I get back to find out they've been overrun by the military. Yeah. That is not diplomacy right there. I'm really fearful for all the other companies we have there, and I don't mean to cut you off.
No, can I just say, but I think your point is extremely well taken because besides this particular case, the potential for a case like this to have a chilling effect on further investment or engagement by our companies as they see what's happening should be a real concern to the federal government in Mexico.
So Vulcan Materials out of Birmingham, Alabama has invested billions of dollars up there in that facility that the Mexican government is now going to turn into a terminal. I know I don't need to tell you, but for the record, the mission of the State Department is to protect and promote U.S. security, prosperity, and democracy values, and shape the international environment, if I read that correctly, in which Americans can thrive. And I don't think what's happening with Vulcan is a good example of where that fits. My question is pretty simple because I'm running out of time here too. Tell me how $20,600 sent to the State Department to fund drag performances at a culture event in Ecuador, or $300,000 grant opportunity for the U.S. Embassy in Botswana to support the LGBTQIA plus groups. I realize the numbers are a very small scheme here, but I'm just curious how we can spend money on these issues outside this country, and it fits within the prelude of the definition of your department.
So, a couple of things on this. First, we are engaging around the world in cultural diplomacy, We're engaging in also making sure that we're doing what we can to help protect the rights of marginalized groups, including notably the LGBTQI+ community, which in so many countries around the world is under threat and in many cases under growing threat. And I believe that it's fundamental to our democracy to demonstrate that we are looking out for marginalized populations, whatever they may be. We do the same thing with persecuted religious minorities around the world, something also of deep concern to me and to the department. On the cultural programming, look, in this particular instance, the particular program you mentioned in Ecuador, that actually didn't go forward. The grantee, in this case, decided to put a halt to it. You or I may not have chosen to fund this particular program. I think picking, one program out of the many that we do for particular scrutiny, I don't think is an accurate reflection of what we're doing. But in this particular case, it didn't go forward. Now, I have to tell you, maybe it's just me. I remember a time when I think the most popular movie in the United States was Tootsie, and then a little while later it was Mrs. Doubtfire, and then we had The Birdcage, all movies that I loved. So on one level, I got to say, I'm just not sure I get what the concern is about, but I also acknowledge that, again, you or I may not have chosen to fund this particular program.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I look forward to, because the issue that he just brought up about Mexico is not only Mexico, we have an similar issue with Honduras, and so we'll continue to be in communication on those issues.
Thank you.
Mr. LaTurner, again, also a privilege to have you on this subcommittee, sir. You're
Thank you,
recognized.
Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Secretary. As you know, the menace of the Chinese Communist Party is growing abroad, and now it has even come to our shores. We've seen President Xi and the CCP buy up American farmland, steal our intellectual property, and violate our sovereignty by spying on us with high-altitude balloons. Being from Kansas, I want to talk about regarding the Chinese purchasing of American farmland. That specifically is, and I want to know what specifically your administration is doing to track and prevent this from negatively impacting our national security.
So, Congressman, one of the things that we've been intensely focusing on is investments from other countries, notably China, that could in any way undermine our security. And we focused, of course, in the technology sector, in sensitive places geographically. As you know, we have a committee that looks at foreign investment in the United States through that lens. So I think, from my perspective, it is very important that we build the highest possible fence around the most sensitive areas. Now, I have to admit, it's beyond my province, my expertise, when it comes to much broader investments, particularly, for example, in farmland. I can see, obviously, the merits and importance of continuing to generate foreign investment, including from China, if it's beneficial to our economy, beneficial to our farmers, et cetera. On the other hand, if there are real concerns about the security or strategic impact that this could have, that's obviously something we need to address.
Would you be willing to provide a classified briefing to members on any efforts that are currently ongoing related to this specifically?
Certainly, if there's anything that's within our jurisdiction, yes.
Okay, I appreciate that. Your administration has never truly set a red line on Afghanistan in regards to the practices of the Taliban. Mm-hmm. They had their first day of school earlier this week, and girls across the country were denied access to basic education, not to mention countless other barbaric measures they're exposed to. What measures are you taking to ensure that no U.S. funding ends up in the hands of the Taliban or is used to further the goals of their brutal regime?
First of all, I deplore the edicts that the Taliban has issued when it comes to, among other things, women and girls, and including the edicts preventing them from getting an education, either above the 6th grade level or going to university, or participating in the economy and participating in the provision of humanitarian assistance, which is fundamentally against the interests of the Afghan people, besides being wrong. When it comes to that, first, I think we've been very clear that to the extent the Taliban is looking for any kind of more normal relationship with any country around the world, if this continues, it's simply not going to happen. And we're making sure with country after country that they hold the line on these practices and making sure that they don't go forward with a more normal relationship, which the Taliban wants.
But it is
And
a
in terms of our
priority.
funding.
Yeah, that's what I want.
Yeah, I know you want to see.
I don't have a lot of time left.
No, I appreciate that. In terms of our funding, we provide humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. We've been the leading provider of humanitarian assistance including since the withdrawal, to make sure to the best of our ability that people who desperately need food and basic humanitarian support get it. We do it, of course, through implementing partners, United Nations and NGOs.
Will you
These
communicate with my office about your efforts specifically to prevent money from,
Yes.
of course, going to the valuable aid, but not going to the
Yes,
Taliban?
absolutely.
On March 20th, your department released the 2022 Human Rights Report, which rightly identified the violence perpetrated by the Ortega regime in Nicaragua, including arbitrary arrests, tortures, and killings. This includes closures of Catholic universities, banning Way of the Cross processions, and recently exiling 222 political prisoners and members of the Catholic Church to the United States. However, one of these political prisoners, Bishop Rolanda Alvarez, Bishop of the Diocese of Matagalpa, refused to board that plane to the U.S. and has been sentenced to 26 years in prison for his courage in speaking out against President Ortega's anti-democratic persecution. They don't know what prison he is in now. His family can't communicate with him now. Is Ambassador Sullivan in Managua taking any concrete action to secure the release of Bishop Alvarez?
Yes, we are.
Are you familiar with this?
I'm very familiar with it. In fact, those who were released, I met with a number of them at the State Department when we got them to the United States. I'm very glad that they're out of jail where they never should have been in the first place. It's deeply unfortunate, of course, that they were expelled from their own country and can't continue to live and work freely there, but at least I'm glad they're out of prison. Bishop Alvarez, exactly as you said, chose not to do this. I have deep admiration for him, and our embassy is tracking this, and I am tracking this. Our influence with the Nicaraguan government is somewhat limited, but we've made very clear our conviction that he should be released from prison.
If you'll forgive me, Mr. Chairman, who specifically in your office can we communicate with on this topic?
I would start with the Assistant Secretary, Brian Nichols, for the Western Hemisphere. But if you're not, we have Nazar Kuglu, who's here, who's our Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs, who's somewhere in the room behind me. So I invite you to work with Naz or work with Brian Nichols.
Very good. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. Members, obviously, we may submit additional questions for the record. Mr. Secretary, you've been generous with your time, and we want to be respectful to you because the engines are probably already running on the airplane. This will conclude today's hearing, and the Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations and Related Programs stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.